Courthouse, morning light spilling over marble columns. A calm before the storm. Narrator, calm but charged with tension. Most people, when faced with a courtroom, a judge, and the weight of the law, they fold. They apologize. They take the punishment, whether it's fair or not. But Karoline Leavitt, she's not most people. Cut to interior, courtroom 3B. Empty wooden benches. Clock ticking faintly. To Karoline, this was just another case. A name on a docket. A stop on her morning schedule. She'd been here before. She knew the room, the faces, the rhythm. She even knew where the stenographer liked to sit and how the city attorney always adjusted his tie when he was nervous. Nothing about this felt unusual, until Judge Dalton walked in. Visuals, slow motion, the heavy door creaks open. A tall figure enters. Narrator, Judge Raymond Dalton. Tall, graying beard, cold eyes. He didn't command attention with theatrics. He didn't have to. The air changed when he entered, and Karoline felt it, instantly. Cut to Karoline sitting at the defendant's table, calm, focused, fingertips resting on a legal brief. Dalton didn't greet the courtroom, didn't acknowledge counsel. He just spoke. Dalton's voice, flat, firm, recorded as if over PA system. The court has reviewed the matter at hand. The defendant is found in violation of Local Statute 14B and is therefore subject to a fine of $110,000 payable immediately. The courtroom freezes. Even the city attorney looks stunned. No trial, no evidence presented, no opportunity to speak, just a ruling. Like a hammer falling from the sky, most people would have cracked. Most people would have begged. Karoline blinked, once, then slowly, deliberately, she closed the folder in front of her. Visuals, close-up of her face, neutral, calm, but eyes sharp. Your Honor, with all due respect, we haven't even begun proceedings. I haven't had the chance to present my argument. Her tone didn't rise. She didn't plead. She didn't fight. She challenged, with reason, with poise, with the confidence of someone who knows the law like most people know their own name. Visuals. Dalton barely moves, his face unreadable. Dalton, the arguments are irrelevant. The violation is clear. The law is clear. Beat. That's when she knew. This wasn't about the statute. This wasn't about city code or compliance or regulation. This was about her, putting her in her place, making an example of the woman who had won too many times, pushed too many boundaries. Visuals, Karoline sitting straighter, expression tightening just slightly. If the law were that clear, we wouldn't be here. It wasn't defiance. It was a declaration. Because Karoline Leavitt didn't walk into that courtroom to bow. She walked in to be heard. And now, she was going to make damn sure she would be. Cut to, city attorney squirming in his chair. A spectator leans forward. The courtroom begins to feel different. She wasn't just defending a case. She was preparing for a battle. And Judge Dalton? He had no idea. He just stepped into her arena. Visuals, Judge Dalton behind the bench, arms crossed, face smug, tapping his gavel gently like punctuation marks to his power. Narrator, Judge Dalton thought this would be over in minutes. A simple statement, a fine, a silent courtroom, a woman with no chance to respond. But Karoline Leavitt, she didn't come to play defense. She came to turn the tables. Cut to, Karoline seated, calm, composed, but her eyes sharp as a blade. You're denying me the right to defend myself? That's unprecedented. One sentence. That's all it took. The gallery stopped breathing. A law clerk froze mid-typing. The city attorney's pen paused just above the paper. Law. This was theater, and she refused to be. The balance of power had just shifted. Dalton wasn't in control anymore. She was. Visuals, Karoline slowly standing up, paper in one hand, gaze locked on the judge. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply held her ground because she knew the truth. This wasn't law. This was theater, and she refused to be anyone's silent actor. Dalton leans back in his chair, brow furrowing. Dalton, you're welcome to try, Miss Leavitt, but I assure you the outcome will be the same. He smiled like a man who thought he still had control, like a man who didn't realize he'd already lost it. Cut to Caroline calmly adjusting her papers, the way a surgeon might prepare before an operation. The fine? It wasn't the problem. She'd fought harder battles, paid bigger prices. But this was principle, and Karoline never walked away from that. Then I suppose we should get started. The courtroom shifts, gallery leans forward, even the stenographer adjusts in her seat. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. She wasn't reacting, she was strategizing. Every movement, every word, every pause, calculated. Karoline slowly turns a page, eyes never leaving the bench. Before I proceed, Your Honor, just to clarify, are you officially stating that the defense has no right to present arguments in a legal proceeding? Dalton, the violation is clear. The fine stands. He thought his word was final. He thought authority alone was enough. But Karoline, she was just getting started. Interesting. Excuse me? Karoline back slightly. I've practiced law for years, and I've never seen a judge dismiss a defense before hearing a single word of it. What's the word for that? Oh, right, unprecedented. Gallery murmurs again, louder this time. She wasn't disrespectful. She was precise. She wasn't loud. She was surgical. She wasn't provoking the judge. She was cornering him. Visuals. Dalton shifts in his seat. His fingers twitch. His jaw tightens. This court does not exist for theatrics, Miss Leavitt. If you have a legal argument, make it. Otherwise, move on. There it was. He opened the door. And Karoline? She stepped right through. Cut to. Karoline places both hands on the desk, slowly stands, eyes locked in. Very well. Let's talk about local statute 14B, the one you claim I violated. You say the law is clear. That's fascinating, because this same statute has been challenged multiple times in the past 5 years. Visuals. She taps the document in front of her. Every word, now a legal arrow. Subsection C, for example, its language is so vague, it's been ruled unenforceable in at least 3 separate rulings. And just last year, the appellate court declared that imposing fines without allowing due process violates constitutional protections. She didn't come to plead, she came to prove, and every word was a strike. Dalton straightens. His mask starts to crack. Those cases do not apply here. Karoline, don't they? She flips to another page, again for effect more than need. Reynolds v. Clearwater. The court ruled that administrative fines issued without evidentiary consideration are subject to reversal. I'm sure, Your Honor, wouldn't want to ignore precedent. The courtroom didn't erupt. It froze. She wasn't just defending herself. She was educating the judge. Dalton leaned forward. His fingers laced, his voice dropped. Dalton, are you threatening this court with an appeal? Your Honor, I don't make threats. I cite the law. The power has shifted completely. Visuals. Karoline standing at the defendant's table, papers laid out like weapons on a battlefield. Her expression, calm but calculated. In that courtroom, Karoline wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't making a scene. She was building a case, brick by legal brick. Cut to City Attorney fidgeting, Judge Dalton watching, but saying nothing. While others rely on emotion or excuses, Karoline relied on facts, statutes, precedent case law. Let's talk about Reynolds v. Clearwater. She lifts a document, reads from it, precise, deliberate. The court ruled that an administrative fine issued without evidentiary consideration is subject to reversal on procedural grounds. Boom. One case, one precedent, and already Dalton's grip on the courtroom was slipping. Karoline flipping the page, not even looking down. Now let's look at Henderson v. City of St. Petersburg. Visuals. Gasps from the back row, even a few subtle nods from clerks watching intently. Same statute, same vague language. And what did the court say? Fails to provide sufficient notice or clear standards for enforcement. Karoline wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was educating the court. Every sentence was a masterclass in the law. And suddenly, even the gallery, the spectators, the staff, the lawyers weren't looking at Judge Dalton. They were watching her. Cut to Judge Dalton, jaw tight, fingers pressed together. Narrator: Dalton was trying to hold the line, but Karoline kept advancing. Your Honor, let's be clear. The statute you're invoking, 14b, has already been torn apart in appellate court. Without concrete evidence, fines under this statute are unconstitutional. She taps the table, just once, but it echoes like a gavel. She didn't pace. She didn't shout. She made the courtroom come to her, and they did. Cut to Officer Calloway in the back row, trying not to shift in his seat. City Attorney, swallowing hard. Karoline had done her homework. More than that, she had memorized the terrain. She knew every trap the prosecution would try to set, and she was already 5 steps ahead. Visuals, Karoline referencing 3 more documents, placing them side by side like puzzle pieces. Karoline, if the law is as clear as you say, why has it been interpreted 3 different ways by 3 different courts? And if this court chooses to ignore precedent, then I'll have no choice but to file an appeal. No threat, no bluff, just cold legal truth. Dalton, leaning forward, attempting to regain control. You're twisting the law, Miss Leavitt. I'm not twisting anything, Your Honor. I'm quoting it. You're welcome to follow along. Cut to entire courtroom silent. You could hear a pen drop. Karoline didn't just walk in with confidence. She walked in with receipts. And now the judge, who began this hearing with a $110,000 verdict, was struggling to hold the floor. Visuals. Judge Dalton glancing at his own notes, his mask of control beginning to slip. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about every person who'd been steamrolled by a system that forgot its own rules. Karoline was showing the courtroom and the world what happens when someone refuses to be silenced. Cut to Karoline calmly looking up from her notes, locking eyes with Dalton. You can call it whatever you want, Your Honor. But what you're doing doesn't align with the law. She wasn't angry. She wasn't shaken. She was unshakable. And in that moment, everyone knew it. Visuals, the courtroom, tense, still. Judge Dalton sits in silence. Then abruptly he rises and exits through the side door. Judge Dalton wasn't used to being challenged, especially not like this. He came in expecting a 10-minute hearing. Instead, he was locked in a legal chess match and losing. So he did what men like him do when their power slips. He called for backup. Visuals, the chamber doors swing open. Dalton returns, but this time, he's not alone. Behind him, a second judge enters, older, sharper, with an air of final authority. Narrator: Judge Alan Whitaker, senior judge, higher rank, respected by the entire circuit. Dalton didn't just want help. He wanted control. He wanted intimidation. But Karoline didn't even blink. Visuals, Karoline calmly adjusting her notes, then looking up, meeting Whitaker's eyes without flinching. Whitaker, Miss Lerm, Miss Leavitt, I understand you're challenging the fine based on procedural grounds. You believe it should be overturned? Karoline, without hesitation. I don't believe it. I know it. Beat, a subtle murmur rolls through the gallery. She could have softened her answer. She could have tread lightly with the senior judge. But Karoline Leavitt didn't shrink when they turned up the heat. She stepped into it. Whitaker folds his hands, watching her closely. You referenced Henderson v. St. Petersburg. Are you aware that a later ruling clarified certain interpretations of the statute could remain enforceable? Ah, there it was. The trap. They weren't fighting her facts. They were twisting the fine print, hoping to bury her argument in technicalities. Visuals, Karoline folding her hands, smiling faintly. Yes, I'm aware. But that same clarification also stated explicitly that enforcement must meet strict evidentiary standards, which, in this case, it did not. She didn't stumble. She didn't falter. She turned their own counter-argument into her next strike. Visuals, a uniformed man stands from the back row, middle-aged, crisp navy shirt. Officer Brian Calloway. Whitaker, the enforcement officer, is present. Would you like to cross-examine him? They thought they were putting her on the spot. Instead, they handed her a gift. Karoline, yes, Your Honor, I would. Visuals, Officer Calloway takes the stand. Confident, almost smug, walking deliberately toward the stand. Officer Calloway, can you confirm you issued this violation? Yes, ma'am. And on what basis did you determine a violation occurred? The property wasn't in compliance with the municipal code. I saw it myself. That's all I needed. Karoline, did you take any photographs? No, it wasn't necessary. There it was. No photos, no reports, no documentation, just a man's word. And Karoline tore it apart, carolessing the bench. Your Honor, we have no visual evidence. No witness statements, no written documentation, just one person's subjective judgment. That is not evidence. That is an opinion, and it fails every standard set by the very clarification Judge Whitaker just referenced. Visuals. Whitaker shifts slightly in his chair. Dalton says nothing. Narrator. They brought in Whitaker to corner her, to put her in check. But Karoline didn't just escape. She flipped the board. So I ask again, how does this court justify a fine under a statute that lacks any legal foundation for enforcement? The courtroom is silent. Whitaker stares at her. Dalton avoids her gaze. They'd tried to break her with backup. Instead, they handed her the biggest win of the day. Karoline didn't just survive the ambush. She commanded it. Visuals. Karoline standing tall at the defense table. Her voice steady, her presence unshakable. All eyes on her. The courtroom wasn't the same anymore. The judge had the bench, but Karoline Leavitt had the room. Visuals. The gallery. Attorneys, clerks, even the court reporter are now leaning in, eyes fixed on her. Dalton had walked in thinking this was a routine hearing, but now he was just trying to keep up. Because Karoline wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was dismantling a system in real time. Karoline, firm rising energy. If this stands, then anyone can be fined for anything without proof. That's not justice. That's unchecked authority. Visuals. The words hang in the air like thunder. Even Judge Whitaker shifts in his seat. She wasn't yelling. She didn't need to. Her words were sharper than volume. And every sentence cut deep. Karoline, sweeping gaze across the courtroom. Let's put this in plain terms. A business owner, a teacher, a veteran, a mother. Any one of them could be handed a citation based on nothing but a hunch. No pictures, no reports, no witnesses. Just the word of an officer and a fine that could ruin their life. It wasn't a legal argument anymore. It was a moral one. Visuals, city attorney fidgeting, Dalton's jaw tight, Whitaker silent. Karoline, calm, strong. And if they challenge it, too bad. The court has discretion. She said it like it was poison in her mouth, because it was. But discretion without accountability is tyranny dressed in robes. A quiet gasp from someone in the gallery, another nodding slowly. That courtroom had seen 1,000 hearings before this one, but no one would forget this, because Karoline was doing something bold. She was calling the system out while standing in its heart. Visuals. Karoline turns to the gallery, her voice now steady, deliberate. This isn't about a code violation. It's about due process, about principle. Because if the law only protects us when it's convenient, then it doesn't protect us at all. And in that moment, wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for everyone who had ever been told to sit down, shut up, and pay the price. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She wasn't asking for favors. She was demanding accountability. And the room knew it. Visuals: Judge Dalton's hands tighten on the bench. Whitaker still watching. Newgate. Dalton could feel the floor shifting beneath him. He had the title, the robe, the bench. But she had the truth. And truth doesn't need a gavel to be powerful. Karoline, I'm not asking for this court to favor me. I'm asking it to uphold the standard it was built to protect. The standard that says justice requires evidence, not assumption. Long pause. The entire courtroom is still. A single paper rustles in the back row. She wasn't arguing anymore. She was leading. And whether the judges wanted to admit it or not, Karoline had just redrawn the lines of the battlefield. Because this wasn't about Karoline Leavitt versus a $110,000 fine. It was Karoline Leavitt versus the system that let it happen. And at that moment, she was winning. Visuals: a long, tense silence in the courtroom. Dalton stares at Karoline. Whitaker looks on, hands folded. No one speaks. He tried everything. Dismissal, authority, reinforcements. But now, even Judge Dalton had run out of rope. Visuals: Dalton slowly exhales, his shoulders visibly tense. Dalton: this court finds that the imposed fine does not meet the necessary evidentiary threshold and is therefore overturned. Case dismissed. Karoline lowers her folder, slowly nodding once. No celebration, just resolve. He didn't want to say it. He didn't want to give her the win. But the law left him no choice. Visuals: Karoline turns to leave, walking toward the double courtroom doors. Most people would have smiled. Most people would have basked in it. But Karoline? She knew this wasn't the end. As she steps forward, Dalton's voice breaks the silence once more. Dalton, quietly, eyes still on her. Miss Leavitt, I underestimated you. Karoline pauses. Turns slightly. Her reply is calm, precise. You wouldn't be the first. Visuals: she turns away, walking down the long marble corridor. She had stood alone. She had challenged the ruling. She had won. But outside that courtroom, something else waited. The courthouse doors swing open, walks into the sunlight. Victory. It felt different today. Not like a celebration, more like a shift in the ground beneath her. Footsteps behind her. She turns slowly. Judge Whitaker approaching quietly. Whitaker? Miss Leavitt? A moment, she stops, arms folded lightly, watching him, then speaking carefully. I wasn't brought in to observe. I was brought in to contain. Beat, the words land like bricks. It was never about the fine. It was never about one courtroom. It was about sending a message, crushing dissent, making her a warning to others. But instead, she became a symbol. Visuals: Karoline nods slowly, understanding the weight of what she's just heard. So what happens now? Whitaker looks toward the courthouse, then back at her. They'll be watching, and not just here. Beat. He nods, respectful, then walks away. Karoline Leavitt hadn't just walked into a courtroom and beaten a fine. She had stood toe-to-toe with a system designed to silence people like her, and made it blink first. She had exposed something bigger, and now it knew her name. Visuals: Karoline standing on the courthouse steps, the city buzzing around her. She breathes deep. Because real power doesn't come from a gavel. It comes from knowing the law and having the courage to use it. Power doesn't come from a gavel. It comes from knowing the law and having the courage to use it. Like, share, subscribe for more real stories of courage, justice, and truth.